Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's video cast. I'm Matthew Gardner, a fellow analyst here at KuppingerCole, and we're going to get into the topic of security automation and the rise of the AI SOC. This is essentially a discussion around a report that we published last month called the Emerging AI SOC Leadership Compass. So hopefully you will or have read that. I want to welcome my color commentator, Rick Bosworth, who's head of
Thank you,
product
Matthew.
marketing. Give us
Pleasure
a
to be
little
here.
introduction.
Yeah, sure. Rick Bosworth, product marketing with Torque.
So I'm going to do a little play-by-play, and then Rick's going to chime in with some color commentary about his experiences and the experiences of Torque with their customers. Okay, so let's get into it. So first, just a level set for those of you who know KuppingerCole and our research, you probably already know what a leadership compass is, but for those of you who are here for the first time, leadership compass basically is our pillar research in any particular area of cybersecurity, in this case, security automation. And basically what we do in this sort of research is we look at the market, the trends, the customer requirements and needs, and of course, the vendors in the space, and produce a report that, among other things, assesses the vendors so that will help enterprises select the best vendor for themselves. The one graphic you often see when it's published is this overall leadership compass, which basically distills the vendor assessment into one single graphic. And it takes into consideration product capabilities, essentially core capabilities of a given product domain. It takes into consideration the market position, meaning number of customers, growth of customers, the level of investment, and other factors. And then it importantly takes in innovation. And particularly in this domain, innovation is really about the application of AI and AI agents to the needs of security automation. So you can see here, Rick is representing a company that did well in this report, and so should be able to add a lot of color to what we're going to talk about. One quick note is that you'll note that the vendors, there's some names you maybe recognize, some names you don't recognize, and that's endemic of the market space as it exists. You have platform vendors, sort of the big security vendors that have security automation capabilities, among many others. You have specialists or standalone vendors like Torque and others that are essentially new entrants into the security automation market. And then you have some vendors that also provide managed detection and response services on top of their platform. And that is just part of their service delivery. Not every vendor does it. Some vendors are supporting independent managed providers. That's a factor that we are going to talk about as we dig in. So just to level set, when we're mostly going to talk about the use of AI agents in security operations centers. So an agent is the top topic in the world these days. But just to think about it, essentially it's a worker. Very simple definition. It's a worker that can perceive, reason, and act on your behalf toward a goal. Obviously, when you bring agents into the SOC, it's about threat detection, triage, investigation, malware analysis, and response procedures, and other things you might like to automate. So you have agents that are specialized in those domains, and that's really what we'll be talking about here.
And Matthew, if I could add right here, in going out in the field and speaking with CISOs and practitioners, sometimes the topic of the underlying model behind the agent comes up. And the best advice I offer around the underlying model, I think it's a discussion that misses the real issue. It's less about the underlying model behind the agent, because Claude, OpenAI, Anthropic, they're all going to be innovating and moving. It's really more about what you have built, tested, iterated, hardened, and optimized atop that substrate that makes the AI agent able to act on your behalf.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think of those foundational models or all the things you don't have to recreate to deliver these services, like
Well said.
interpreting language. You don't want to have to create that. It's not like, understanding code, for example, or interpreting logs. That's sort of a core function. But then what the specialized agents need to do is bring it down into the domain of security automation. And that requires different sorts of data, integrations, and other things to make it useful in the domain of a SOC. So again, I presumably what I've seen is that the providers of AI agents in the SOC are basically going back to any number of those foundational models based on cost and performance at any given time, and
You
sort
bet.
of using them, switching around as necessary. All right, so let me move on. So there's basically some long-standing challenges that have existed since SOCs really have existed as an entity over the last at least 10 years, probably more. I mean, you have alert overload. You have, how do you provide 24/7 coverage? How do you overcome the fact there's a lot of specialized knowledge needed? The trade-off between dialing in to reduce false positives, but perhaps getting more false negatives, but not overflowing yourself with alerts, having great expertise basically to know what an attack might look like. So these are challenges that, every organization deals with. And what my overall view of this is that we're sort of in this renaissance, this new approach, AI agent-based approach to address these long-standing challenges. I assume you see it the same way, Rick?
We sure do. And when we think about the adoption of AI in the SOC to address these long-standing challenges, none of which we're going to solve by throwing people at them, right? This is the role that agentic AI is adding. But CISOs are telling me that transparency and control are fundamental to their willingness to adopt and expand. The adoption argument is really already over. We see statistics out there that a plurality are already using some form of AI for some use case within the SOC. And that's published in research from Torque that we did a blinded study of 450 security SecOps professionals worldwide. But yeah, with the transparency, the agent has to show its work. With the control, autonomy can't be a light switch. It can't be a binary choice between human or agent. There has to be some interaction. It needs to be more of a dial.
And that's sort of a classic early adopter issue is, clearly there are problems we haven't been able to solve with traditional SOAR or traditional rule-based systems. And a new technique is exciting, but it has other challenges. And so it's sort of your sort of summary is, how do you gain trust and to know how much autonomy to allow versus how much control you need? And it feels like we're in that discovery phase with the early adopters.
I had the same read of the room.
Good. Another sort of key driver is, of course, what the other side is doing. And the other side is doing what they always do, is they apply the latest and greatest technology to help them with their attacks. And so if you think about the attack chain, AI is very useful all the way down the attack chain. And we've already started to see threat actors do it. You've seen, publicly disclosed breaches and researchers talking about this issue. So I think it's inevitable that they will use this tool because it provides them ROI. And in my view, as they accelerate and become more efficient at their attacks, it's only obvious that you need to use similar technology on the defense side, and that's essentially driving the need for AI and security generally, but also in the security automation space. So I don't think there's any controversy there.
No controversy. Fully agree.
The basic one of the points that, as I was putting together this report, I found myself sort of trying to explain the rationale at a high level of why you apply AI-based techniques to the security automation challenges that we talked about a couple of slides ago. And the way I sort of think about it, it's essentially like a mirror image to a rule-based system. Rule-based systems are what we're used to. Rule-based systems have their place, but they sort of hit a brick wall. And so the weaknesses of rule-based systems shown here are really addressed by a probabilistic-based system that leverages AI. And so where rule-based systems are weak, AI-based systems are strong. And in many ways, vice versa, that we'll talk about.
Totally. And when people think of SOAR, that has a connotation associated with it, inflated promises, difficulty extracting value. You said something in your research, Matthew, about it hitting a wall. I couldn't agree more. That wall, people have been banging their head against it now for years, actually. But the one thing I wanted to add with regards to agentic AI, that can reside within your classic workflows or outside of those workflows. You can give declarative instructions and an access of to data and a certain set of tools that you define that you limit the agent is not going to run amok. It only does what you allow it to do. And the more specific the role you can define for the agent, the better results you will get.
Basically, providing determinism, providing a guardrail around what the agent will do. Not dissimilar to the guardrails you might provide around your people. Kind of the same idea,
Correct.
just sped up a bit. Reminds me a little bit when previous life I worked. I was a product on the product team of a SOAR product, and we used to see customers get some good value out of it, but we'd see other customers that I would sort of summarize as they were too busy to do any work to become less busy because it
Mm,
required them to have an active engagement in the rule writing and the playbook writing that they could then use to automate other things that historically were manual. And so they were sort of caught that wall where they just couldn't spend the time and effort and or have the sufficient knowledge to essentially automate their way out of these problems. So that's one of the value proposition of an AI agent is that it will do a lot of the work for you because it's a thinking thing in a way. Another sort of takeaway, something to think about is integrations have been critically important in security automation since security automation existed. I mean, you need to integrate to alert sources, SIMs and EDRs and network detection devices. You need context, to make a decision. You need data from threat intelligence services or your asset management systems or DHCP or other things that know about your environment. And you also need the ability to take action. You need the ability to quarantine machines or reset, force password resets of users. That's all remains true in this new world. But then there are also a couple other new types of integrations that become increasingly important. That's the RAG and the MCP, which are, uniquely agent-centric integrations. And so you need, when you're evaluating security automation in this new world, still need to think about the systems that you have, the integrations you need, and then how to expose your resources using these more standard upcoming techniques from the agent world, the RAG and MCP. So presumably Torque spends a fair bit of effort on integrations.
Most certainly. And we have hundreds of integrations ready to use right out of the box. Every security stack is unique. Obviously, somebody might have a different EDR, different firewall vendor, what have you. So having an extensive breadth of integrations that are ready to use helps. But ironically, we figured out that all the agentic AI that we are using ourselves, we've figured out how to use agentic AI to immediately build integrations for us. So any integrations that don't exist, as long as the API is documented somewhere, and it almost always is, I can't imagine that it's not. I've not run into that. We build it in minutes. I mean, it's super easy.
So you're vibe coding your integrations, basically.
Correct. Somebody comes to us and they have a special Snowflake security stack. Oh no, we would really love to use Torque, but you don't integrate with our favorite security vendor. We come back an hour later. Hey, here it is. We've tested it.
The beauty of AI coding. And it would be hard for a human to code an API that has no documentation either. So let's hope that if you have an API that you want people to use, you document it. Yeah, that's definitely a key breakthrough. And if they're not using MCP or RAG, that you can at least take their API and build something relatively quickly. I can imagine a world where a lot of them will just build MCP or RAG interfaces and off we'll go. But
And we have
not quite here yet, but coming. So at the top, I talked a little bit about, sort of the changing nature of how you do security automation from a strategic level. I mean, there's always been this choice between what I'll call a DIY or enterprise built SOC or a largely outsourced version of that with a managed security service provider. And those worlds still exist right now, but because the arrival of AI agents, at least in theory, makes it easier to build your own SOC, perhaps you'll use less managed services. But on the flip side, the managed service providers are aware of this and need, automation themselves to make their business more efficient and effective. So they're also adopting agents on the other side. And I don't think we know how this is going to sort itself out, but the optionality that organizations have has increased. And I assume you're seeing, your customers become, be both enterprise SOCs as well as managed providers.
Yeah, most definitely. Because agentic AI is fundamentally changing how we understand work. And there are reasons why some enterprises choose to have a DIY SOC in-house versus outsourcing that to an MDR service. And, now people are raising the question in the role of agentic AI. I'm using an MDR. Do I bring that in-house and build my own? I think there is opportunity. And before I get to the opportunity, Torque has customers on both sides of the house. We have Fortune 500 customers. We have people on the FTSE. We have global enterprises, thousands of employees. We also who have their SOC in-house. We also have what we call M partners, MDR, MSSP, all these things as customers. What agentic AI is doing is creating an opportunity for people to examine whether or not they want to bring their SOC in-house, and also for the M partners, the MDRs, to say, well, hey, wait a minute. I can add a value added service on top of my business that relies upon agentic AI. It's really interesting. It's early innings yet, Matthew. I don't think we've seen how this is going to shake out, but I do believe in the value of human ingenuity. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
I think it obviously it's good for the customer to have this improved capabilities and optionality. I think about one reason people go to managed providers is 24/7 coverage. So they have some SOC on house, but it doesn't make sense to run it 24/7. Well, maybe we'll be at the point where agents can be your 24/7 coverage, at least on the initial triage and maybe, basic remediation. So if that's the reason you're going to a managed provider, maybe that reason goes away. On the flip side, you have managed providers that, in the worst case are just sort of like, alert forwarding services, which, doesn't have much value. But perhaps if the alerts they forward or, the incidents they forward have already been vetted by a reliable triage process, then those incidents are more valuable. So, there's definitely value that can be created on both sides.
I agree with that. And, you mentioned the triage use case. That's the classic use case that usually the first thing that comes to mind when enterprises are looking at agentic AI in the SOC. Why? Because there's real pain there. Their SecOps analysts are drowning. Maybe 1 in 4. I can't remember the exact stat, but 1 in 4 alerts are going unvetted before they age out of SLA, or they may not ever get to it and they just move on. Agentic AI delivers machine speed and scale. So naturally, there's a relatively low barrier to entry for agentic triage. And so that's why we see so many vendors chasing after, the agentic triage use case. However, I'll add that if all you're doing is triage, all you've done is move the bottleneck. And I think we'll be talking a little bit later. You have a really compelling graphic a few slides down the road.
Yep. No, definitely. We'll talk about when we go into the sort of recommendations. That's a key topic. Like, where do you apply
right
it?
Here.
Well, there's this one. Yeah, there's this one. So the old fallback for I don't trust the agent, or I don't trust the AI, is the old human in the loop backstop. Our lead analyst Martin Kubinger, kind of the way he talks about this is that AI agents hate people because they're slow. You're essentially attaching a slow human to a fast computer, and that kind of defeats the purpose. However, on the flip side, it's not like we're going to go to full autonomy. So the challenge that a lot of early adopters have is to find that right balance. Clearly, you don't want a dump truck loading every approval request on people, or just making the person push a button every time the AI agent makes a decision. However, having said that, you need to find those areas that's absolutely critical. So how do you find your customers kind of dealing with this quandary between human in the loop and automation?
Yeah. So they're dealing with it by building trust, and everyone's on a journey. So I'm a stats geek, so it's a distribution. On one hand, we have a Fortune 500 retailer who today 51% of their tier one and tier two alerts are handled completely autonomously using Torque agentic AI. From alert triage through resolution of root cause, it's all automated. Now, with Torque, autonomy is a dial. It just so happens that this one customer has turned the dial up to 11. Most customers, and this customer has been with us for a while, so they have learnt a great deal of trust in using agentic AI within their SOC, with their policies. They bent the AI to their will, as everyone should. This is a matter of trust. As you build your trust in your SOC with your instances of agentic AI, I would advise everybody, as we do our customers, to start small. Pick a value added use case in a certain ring scope of assets that makes sense for you and your business. Take it for a test drive. See how it's working. Find the potholes on the road and plug them. And I think that's going to be the playbook for success. Nothing breeds success like success. So
Totally.
start small and build that trust.
And then, if 51% is essentially fully automated, that means 49% aren't. So it's not like they've gone 100. They're just, it's
Correct.
presumably down the road, or the 51 will be 60. That helps a lot.
And I speak with the CISO on occasion, and then I speak also with the people that speak with the CISO more regularly than I do. They have a line of sight to 75% fully autonomous of tier one and tier two by the end of this year. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. But to your point, and I'll never dox our customers. This person is not interested in firing any humans. Their humans are very skilled, and they see agentic AI as working alongside their skilled staff. And that actually is Torque's perspective on using agentic AI in the SOC. I think we are light years away from being able to replace humans with robots.
It actually brings me to recommendations. First recommendation, you hit it already. For me, and it's clearly Torque agrees, it's about augmentation, not autonomy, maybe partial autonomy. There's a
Sure.
lot of efficiency gains that are low hanging fruit. And, you know, sure, maybe some executives will make the wrong decision and think they're going to go to autonomy just to save money, but I think they're going to get bitten.
Yeah,
And
I think so.
the whole idea with automation in every domain is to elevate the people out of the grinding, low value work and help them, be the supervisors of these automation systems.
You hit the nail on the head right there.
So second thing is where to start. I have a couple comments on it consistent with what you said is, if you think about the spectrum of triage or alert triage, investigation, and response, it makes sense. And generally in my research, organizations are on the front end of that. They're focusing on the use of AI on the triage side, partly because it's a great weakness. The alert overload is essentially a lack of sufficient triage. The second thing is it's, a triage decision doesn't necessarily lead to an automatic response. It leads to a bucket of clearly bad things, clearly okay things, and the ones in the middle. And the ones in the middle can be handed over to a person to further evaluate. So start on the front end, things like, suspicious email triage, or a certain other types of triage, or threat hunting, where you're going out and looking for suspicious activity based on perhaps other threats that have been found out in the wild. I think over time, the organizations, as trust is built, will move towards more response procedures, things that are, again, probably low risk, like quarantining a machine that's not a critical machine, like an end user machine, or
Correct.
forcing a password reset. Again, you're not booting the person from the environment entirely. You're just saying, hey, let's let's do a password reset because we're a little suspicious of your activity. So I assume that's essentially what you're recommending or what you're seeing.
Most certainly. And one size does not fit all. So depends upon your SOC, your industry, your high impact use cases. So if a prospective customer is looking for some consultative discussion around where should they start first, Torque will begin by asking many questions. We have a Fortune 500 retailer that within 48 hours of using Torque had deployed agentic AI for email phishing across their enterprise. That was amazing. They were really appreciative of that. And earlier I said success breeds success. They very quickly climbed that learning curve. And then they were like, all right, one down. What's the next one? Oh, okay. Typosquatting is most important to us because of our brand reputation as an online retailer. So agentic AI, now humans don't have to do this. It's all fully automated. They're like, all right, that's two. And then three. It was amazing how many of that this specific customer said goodbye to their legacy SOAR. They were up for renewal and they did not want to do that. They knew that the technology had changed fundamentally. And then they said, we want to be into this AI SOC platform business. Torque, can you help us? We had taken this Fortune 500 retailer and fully transferred 4 years of legacy work, technical debt, all these playbooks, some of which were redundant. We transferred everything, we optimized it, and we created that cognitive space for them to get creative. We did all the grunt work in days, not weeks. And once that was done, it was okay, what's next? What's fun? What's imaginative? What we can do. So, I mean, it's a really interesting use case in that it really would thrill any executive upline or board of directors with what this team accomplished.
My comment earlier was, in my traditional SOAR role, I'd find customers who were too busy to do any work to
Yeah,
become less busy. So essentially what you're saying is you've taken away those too busy things so they could be creative and to do things and to work with agents in this case to become less busy.
absolutely.
So, that's the snowball rolling downhill that we all want to see. The other sort of recommendation takeaway is that we talked about, but integrations and data remain key. It probably, I should have said, is more important now because, of course, an AI system is inherently a data consumption system and it draws inferences and it bases its conclusions and recommendations on the data that it's consuming. So the better the data, the more of the data, the different flavors of the data that are related to the decisions you're trying to make, the better. And so, unfortunately or fortunately, the data is the core element of making your AI agent smarter.
And I think this speaks to control and transparency once again. So, in terms of control, for agentic AI with Torque, we call this Torque hyperagents. The customer can start from a template, and we have dozens of templates and hundreds of integrations, or you can start from scratch. Give the hyperagent a declarative instruction, a role, a goal. Tell it what it is authorized to do and what it must never do. It's really easy. And then tell it what it can access. It's not going to run amok amongst your enterprise. It's not going to do anything give it untoward. Give it the guardrails. Tell it I can access this data set, this tool, this data set, and these three other tools. And then let it go do its job. That's the control. And then the transparency aspect comes into play when, all right, show me your work. Let me inspect. What was your reasoning? What artifacts led you to draw this conclusion? And, it's like any interaction that you have with Claude, right? You give it an instruction and it tells you what it's doing, and then it does the things, and you can go back and rewind the tape and see exactly what it was doing along the way. Once customers get a taste of Torque hyperagents, in my experience, they can't get enough.
That makes sense. I mean, it's sort of like AI use in general. Once you get a taste of whatever your use case is, and you get comfortable with like telling it, no, 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 I don't do that. Give me a graphic that's more like this, and then it
Yep.
iterates, and it actually you figure out how to better explain what you want. And particularly if you're not doing automated remediation, which is where things are changing in your environment. That's part of the trust building, and you're learning how to use the tool, in an optimal way.
Got it.
So the final thing we sort of were touching on already, but the guardrails, approval boundaries. The reality is, this is the learning, is you have a non-deterministic system. In the rule-based world, you write a rule that's if then else, and you can reliably conclude that it will make those decisions because it's mathematically deterministic. In this world, not so much. The advantage is that you have a thinking system, if you will, but these thinking systems might make decisions that you didn't expect or that might change over time. And so sort of combining the need for determinism and the flexibility you get from a non-deterministic system is this learning and this trust building that we're all sort of starting to live through right now.
Matthew, I believe you said it earlier in our discussion, something about the agentic AI being your junior analyst. Junior analysts make mistakes, right? But as long as you have the ability to coach up the analyst, help them learn from the mistakes, and then limit the blast radius and then unwind what they did, you're helping them be better. And then that ties back to our trust. No one's going to throw a junior analyst on day one into something that they can break and cause irreparable damage. Build that trust, build that success, and move forward.
Yep, totally. So before we close out, I'll ask the sort of big question is, how fast do you think AI and AI agents are going to be adopted in the world of security automation in the SOC?
Well, first of all, the adoption is much faster and it's already there. With regards to agentic AI adoption, as of January of 2026, Torque did a sampling of the market, 450 security practitioners and leaders. 56% of those respondents are already using agentic AI. Now, I will tell you, back in April, just 2-3 months after we did the survey, subject to sampling bias, right? I went out and I met with over 200 CISOs over the course of some roundtables, perfectly scientific survey by show of hands, right? How many of you are using agentic AI? It was a lot more than 56%. It was approaching 75%. So the appetite is there, and this is changing fast. And I'll share a little anecdote. Probably about 2 years ago, I was extremely frustrated with agentic AI. It cost me more time to tell it and coach it to do what it is I wanted it to do. The technology, the foundational models that we were talking about were not ready for what I needed it to do. Then something happened about a year ago. It suddenly became a thought partner, or not, if not a thought partner, it became, a junior marketer that I could trust. I was like, okay, could you outline a blog for me? Could you outline social media? Could you do these things for me? Give me something to react to. And then it evolved even further. And now it's acting more like I would dare say, a fourth year college student. Instead of a high school or middle school student, now it's actually an intelligent person that's synthesizing insights and giving me something really meaty to react to. So I think these are the reasons why I'm not unique. Everyone else is seeing the same thing I see. And so we're all adapting to the changing universe. And I guess this was a lot of words. My apologies. I'll close by saying, first there was Bill Gates and Microsoft Windows. Then there was Dell and the PC. Then there was the internet. I really do believe that agentic AI is another one of these foundational transformative technologies that are, I call it a market externality. It's a positive externality that's coming in and fundamentally changing how we work. I see that and I see it happening.
Yeah, totally. It's obvious. If you read, listen to the news, it's happening all over the place. In our little world of security and within our little world of security automation, it feels to me that this is one of the critical use cases because it's the area of, again, maybe it's bias because I've lived in this security world for 25 years, that we're so out of control. We're not in control.
Yeah.
Using techniques up till now. And it's not necessarily because of incompetence. It's just the complexity and the fact that we have a human threat actors on the other end. forcing, they're not trying to play by the rules for sure. We need a new approach to address these challenges we haven't been able to address. And within security automation, I think it's like the front end of that in security. Like this is where the innovation is happening, even within security. So an advantage of many is that if you apply security AI agents and AI and security automation, you're actually going to learn a lot, not just about the application of AI in security in general by doing it in security automation, but you're actually going to learn about the application of AI in general to your business. So you can actually
Yes.
use this as a lead for your whole business. And I do see some companies funding this effort that way because they have a requirement from the board to apply AI to their business.
Yep.
And they're raising their hand and say, we have a great area to apply it in the SOC. And they're like, check, that'll meet the requirement of the board. And then those people can become thought leaders in the application of AI more generally. And so I think
You got
that's
it.
exciting.
It is totally exciting because you mentioned the board, the CEO, thou shalt use agentic AI. Everybody's okay. What does that mean? Meanwhile, the CISOs are looking at that. Oh boy, what do we do to prevent data loss and all the things? But there's also that opportunity that you alluded
To be
to.
the leader,
Everyone
yeah.
is struggling with how to use agentic AI. What if the cybersecurity leaders recognize the opportunity? We're going to apply agentic AI in our SOC, and we will be the template, the guiding light, the roadmap for the rest of the enterprise to use and apply agentic AI, build that trust, find those use cases, build success, how to use agentic AI securely, rationally, and for profit.
Because all the challenges of the application of AI in general apply to security automation, apply generally to the other areas that you can apply
You
it.
got it.
So thanks very much. I just put up a reference to some other KuppingerCole content that informs this topic. Thanks, Rick, for your color commentary on this topic, and thanks to everyone for listening all the way to the end. And hopefully this has provided you some value.
Matthew, thank you so much.
No, thanks, Rick.